This episode of Patriots from the Barrio is sponsored by the Paredes Family Trust. We thank you for your support.
So Ramon's unit arrives in North Africa. They continue training in North Africa. The 36th Division was pretty much kept out of the Sicily campaign, where General Patton raced across the island to secure Sicily. And now the 36th Division is still training, but they are handpicked to lead the Allied landing at Salerno, Italy in September of 1943. This is going to be their first action. After all that training, these men from Company E, who started out from El Paso, Texas, the original Texas National Guard unit out of El Paso, is now going to face the enemy for the first time. So here we are, September 9th, 1943, and the 36th Division leads the Allied landing at Salerno, Italy. Company E comes ashore at about somewhere between 5 and 6 a.m. They weren't part of the very first wave, but here they come, coming ashore. Their unit runs into 5 enemy tanks and a heavy machine gun. So they're moving along pretty good. They're starting to advance. Then they get halted by 5 enemy tanks and a heavy machine gun. A few of the men of Company E were killed in action. Juan Pruitt of Pearsall, Texas, was shooting his rifle right next to my cousin Ramon when he gets shot and killed. Sergeant Manuel Gonzalez of El Paso, Texas, was shot through the legs and laid on the ground and was unable to move. One of the enemy tanks, German tanks, sees the wounded soldier and purposely goes over and runs over the Company E soldier, Manuel Gonzalez. Now, all of the men are witnessing all this, and they're firing their weapons. They're up against tanks. And Ramon would later describe this scene with his grandson, and we'll get to his grandson in a bit. His grandson Henry Ozuna. But here's Ramon. He just witnesses 2 of the men shot on the Salerno beachhead as they came ashore. And he's thinking to himself, well, man, I probably ain't going to make it from here. And he opens fire, kills 2 Germans that are firing from the top of the German tank. And we know this because later on, Willie de Leon was being interviewed about the action at Salerno, and he clearly described Ramon knocking down 2 Germans who were firing from the top of the tanks. Ramon is carrying the Browning automatic rifle. And after he shoots the 2 Germans on top of who were shooting from the top of the tank, he gets out from behind the stone wall that he was firing his BAR, and he charges the machine gun nest. He maneuvers between 2 tanks, and he's now charging the machine gun nest when he's fired upon and he loses his helmet. 2 bullets had pierced his helmet, but somehow he hadn't been hit yet. But 1 bullet did catch him in the right arm, where he dropped his Browning automatic rifle. He's on the ground. He just dropped his Browning automatic rifle. He's shot in the right arm. And he gets up and continues to move to outflank the machine gun nest without a rifle now. All he has is hand grenades and his knife. And Ramon throws in a grenade into the machine gun nest that had pinned down Company E. And the grenade blast instantly killed the 3 Germans that were firing from the machine gun nest. Ramon then jumped into the machine gun nest and killed the 4th German soldier in hand-to-hand combat with a knife. Now that action is described in his Silver Star citation. So the U.S. Army later would award him the Silver Star. Now I think at this time I'm going to bring on a guest on our show. And I'm going to go ahead and bring on one of Ramon's grandsons to talk a little bit about Ramon and his service. All right, so I have a guest with us today, and our guest is Henry Ozuna. He is the grandson of Sergeant Ramon Gutierrez. Henry, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Dave.
I'm glad to have you. I wanted to get a family member's perspective on Ramon and his service, and really, I just wanted to have you. I remember you telling me a story about the first time you asked your grandfather Ramon about his actions at the Salerno beachhead, and I'm wondering if you can retell that story to our audience.
Well, yeah. We were outside in the backyard. We were just man, I saw him over there sitting down, so I going, and I'm thinking it's my time. I mean, I think at the time I was like maybe 15 years old, and I had known about my grandfather's exploits, through little stories and books. I think one's called the Texas Army, and there was a little, and two, every day, man, we'd walk into his house, and his medals were on the wall in a little case. Well, it wasn't a little case; it was a big case. There were the Silver Star and the Bronze Star, 3 Bronze Stars and the 3 Purple Hearts, and all of his other medals. So I was about 15 years old, man, and I take the opportunity, man, just while he's sitting there to ask him, about Salerno. Well, when I had asked him, why he did that, he said, "Mijo, I didn't know." He said, "I thought I was going to die that day." So for that reason, I guess, you have bravery, that stepped in. And I think that, his refusal to give up, and the belief of his belief of justice, and freedom, and fighting for the men, his fellow soldiers, after seeing, several of the men in his company, shot, and killed by he said he thought he was going to die that day. I guess because he saw so many of his fellow soldiers, man, die, so that's, I think, the reason, man, that he did that. That's what he told me. Yeah. I know that the men that, in Company E that he had been with for like, I don't know, probably year, maybe 2 years, training with them, sleeping with them, eating with them, you know. When you're around men like that, on a daily basis, you become a family, you know. So I I think Raymond did it. I mean, he did it, man, because his love for the country, the brotherhood between the soldiers and the people from the Barrio, from South Texas, the bond that they had together, I know one thing, man, that he chose to rise above fear. You know, and what is that? To me, man, that's bravery. And because he was a patriot, man, and because he was an American patriot.
So, Henry, thank you
Yeah.
very much for joining us and giving us your insight
Yeah,
on your grandfather,
yeah,
Sgt Ramon Gutierrez.
yeah. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it, man.
Now, this is a new front in Italy that's being opened up by the Allies. They had just expelled the Germans from North Africa. They had raced across Sicily, and now Italy is the new front in Europe. The Allies have made their landing in Europe in what Hitler called unpenetratable fortress Europe. So we have this new front, and now the Russians had been fighting the Germans on the Eastern Front for a while now. They were very eager to see what the Allies were going to do on this new front. As a matter of fact, Joseph Stalin was pushing the Allies to open up a new front, make the Germans move forces towards a new front. It'll make it easier on the Russians. It'll make it easier on the front, on this new front that they wanted to have the Germans use as many forces as possible to defend, in order to move on them. The Russians sent an officer to view Operation Avalanche, this new front in Salerno, Italy. So they send this Russian observer, and the Russian observer overhears what my cousin Ramon had done on the Salerno beachhead. And he goes back to his commanding officers and he tells them, this is basically, this kind of action will inspire our men on the Eastern Front. The officer put in for a Russian medal for my cousin Ramon. And later on, and we'll get into that story, that's how my cousin Ramon becomes one of the few Americans to be decorated for valor on the battlefield by the Soviet Union during World War II. Now, after Ramon had dispelled of the machine gun nest and opened it up for Company E to continue advancing, remember, they were halted with 5 enemy tanks and a heavy machine gun. Well, with no machine gun for support, the German tanks started to withdraw. The invasion at Salerno went on for a couple of days, and it was really touch and go. At some point, the 36th Division was nearly being pushed off of the beachhead, and they finally got a hold of their defenses and were able to push the Germans back. And the Germans ended up retreating back to the Volturno River after the battle at Salerno. So after Salerno, the 36th Division finds themselves on Mount Rotundo. Now, Mount Rotundo is a strategic hill overlooking the Liri Valley, overlooking the little village of San Pietro, really, there in the central mountains of Italy. As a matter of fact, they went up and relieved Audie Murphy's 3rd Infantry Division at Mount Rotundo. So as Audie Murphy's units coming down the hill, the Company E and the 36th Division was going up the hill to get into their foxholes. And the reason why they had to get into the foxholes was because Mount Rotundo is surrounded by other larger hills that the Germans occupied, and they were raining down artillery on them on a daily basis, several times a day. And the 36th Division took many casualties there at Mount Rotundo. In December of 1943, now Ramon's back with the unit. He's there at Mount Rotundo. Now it's December 1943, and their orders are to do a frontal attack across an orchard to the village of San Pietro. Well, the 141st took heavy casualties trying to take the village of San Pietro. Many of the men were killed, many wounded. It was a disaster of a mission to try to take that village. Well, the 141st Infantry Regiment at the Battle of San Pietro took heavy casualties. At one point during the assault, there was an artillery shell that fell very close to Ramon, and some of the fragments hit him in the head. So he's wounded. Now, he'd been hit in the arm at Salerno. He's now wounded for the second time during the war. It's minor wounds. So he stays on with Company E. He doesn't even go back to, get aid or anything like that. The 36th Division finds themselves finally getting into San Pietro and moving and clearing the little village. And again, they took heavy casualties. So now they're getting replacements. The 141st especially, who took heavy casualties. And they find themselves 1 mile from the Rapido River. Now, Major General Fred Walker, who was the commanding officer of the 36th Division, has new orders, and his orders are to cross the Rapido River. He is attempting to cross the Rapido River with the 141st and the 143rd Infantry Regiments. And within a span of 48 hours, the 36th Division would lose nearly 2,000 men in its attempt to cross the Rapido River in January of 1944. During the assault of the Rapido River, Company E builds this little catwalk to try to get across the river. The Germans had mined both sides of the river. They had flooded the river so that it was hard for the U.S. Army to get any kind of vehicles across the river. So it made it really difficult. And meanwhile, the Rapido River sits right at the foot of Monte Cassino, and the Germans occupied the entire hill. And they're looking down on them, and they have an open field of fire, and are just raining machine gun fire, artillery, naval warfare rockets. It was just deadly to try and cross this river, and they paid heavily for it with nearly 2,000 losses. Ramon is going across the catwalk and ends up going into the river. And by the time he comes out of the river, he's on the German side of the river with no weapon. So he's there on the German side of the river, and he's quickly captured. He is being led back to the rear by Germans, 2 German soldiers. And now, you have to remember, this is January 1944. There's dense fog. It's dark out because they try to cross it at night. And with the heavy, dense fog, they don't see, you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. So my cousin Ramon kept tripping, and he didn't realize it then, but he realized it after, that he was tripping over dead Americans on the German side of the Rapido River, those that had been killed on that side of the river. One of the times that Ramon accidentally trips, because it's dark, they can't see, it's foggy, he goes down, and he stays down. And the 2 Germans that are behind him, who can barely see with the fog, just walked right by him. And Ramon stayed on the German side of the river for nearly 24 hours before swimming back. Now, Company E in the 141st crossed the Rapido River with 154 men in January of 1944. Only 27 men of Company E came back. They were either killed, wounded, or captured. Many of the men were captured and spent months in German POW camps. Eduardo Romo of El Paso, Texas, had been captured and spent 16 months in German POW camps. Ricardo Palacios of El Paso, Texas. Julio de Hoyos of Laredo, Texas, was captured. Ernesto Cortazar was captured at the Rapido River and spent many, many months in German POW camps. So Ramon, along with other soldiers from Company E that made it back, again, only 27 men made it back. You had people in the weapons platoon like Santiago Jaramillo and Alex Carrillo, who were both from El Paso, Texas, had been captured on the other side of the river, but managed to kill their captor and swim back across the river. They made it back. Now, after the Rapido River, Company E stayed in that area. They were actually marched up near Monte Cassino, and were still dug in. So the 36 attempted to cross in January, attempted to cross the Rapido River in January of 1944. In February, the Allies decided to bomb Monte Cassino, the abbey, the 6th century abbey that sat atop Monte Cassino, and they ended up bombing it. And Company E had a ringside seat to it because they were dug in pretty close there. So they had a ringside seat to probably one of the most regrettable missions of all of World War II, the destruction of a monastery that sat atop Monte Cassino. Finally, the 36th Division gets pulled off the line. This unit is decimated after their attempt to cross the Rapido River. So they have to take in new replacements. Now, these guys started out as an all Mexican-American unit. Remember that. As they were taking casualties, the Army didn't care anymore that this was a unit made up of Mexican Americans. Now, anybody, if you're breathing, you're being brought into as replacements. So they were no longer an all Mexican American unit. Well, most of them had become casualties during the war. So the unit is finally resting, getting replenished with replacements from all over the country, not just from Texas anymore, right? They're coming from everywhere. And in May, they make their way to the Anzio beachhead. During the same time when the 36th Division was crossing the Rapido River, the Allies were also landing in the back behind the enemy lines at Anzio. The trouble was that was January of 1944, and they were landing at Anzio, and they hadn't even moved out. They hadn't even broken out from the beachhead. They were still there. It's now May. It's late May of 1940. So for nearly 5 months, that unit there at Anzio is getting bombed and shelled because they hadn't even really broken out from the Anzio beachhead area. And the 36th Division arrives, and Ramon is now a sergeant. He's one of only a few men who has seen combat, who has combat experience. So he goes from private PFC to sergeant, totally bypassing corporal. So they made him a sergeant. He's now leading the advanced squad, the same advanced squad that had landed at Salerno and run into 5 enemy tanks. Now he's leading his advanced squad. Well, during the Battle of Alatri, they're out there in the front. They're the advanced squad. They get overrun by a German counterattack at the Battle of Alatri. This is May 1944. And Ramon is captured again. This time, he's being led behind enemy lines by Germans, and one of the officers, German officers, sees that Ramon has stripes on his uniform, and they instructed the German soldiers to take him to a special place. Well, they were interrogating him, and Ramon would only give them his name and rank and serial number, and they were beating him. At one point, as they were leading him to a vehicle to move him, he wasn't walking fast enough, and he gets stabbed in the back with a bayonet. So, because they wanted him to move faster, they end up putting him in a building just north of Rome. And after a few days, an Allied bombing happened and hit the building. And through all the confusion, Ramon was able to get out of the building through a hole in the wall, and he ends up with Italian villagers who hide him from the Germans. He's hidden for about 2 or 3 days until American forces come through the area, and they let him know that they have a wounded American soldier with them, which was Ramon. What really got to me about Ramon's story, his absolute will to stay alive, his tenacity, his resiliency to make it back home. Now, Ramon is wounded. He's laid up in a hospital for a while. He's awarded his Silver Star from his actions at Salerno. And this was now June of 1944. Rome has fallen, and the Allies had moved into Rome, finally. They had landed in September of 43, and it took them all the way to June of 1944 to get to Rome. Now, Ramon is healing, and he's thinking, okay, I'm going to heal. I'll be able to get back to my unit. And they tell him, yeah, you're not going back to your unit. We're actually going to send you back home because we would like you to go to Washington, D.C., because the Soviet Union has awarded you with a medal, and we would like you to go to Washington, D.C. to pick that up. Before the 36th Division made its way to Anzio, back in Washington, D.C., the Russian ambassador was in Washington, D.C., and he spoke with the Secretary of State, Cordell Hull, back in Washington, D.C. During that meeting, the Russian ambassador presented several medals to our Secretary of State for American servicemen for their valor on the battlefield. And among the listed was Private Ramon Gutierrez of Company E in the 141st for his actions at Salerno, Italy. The medal is the Order of Patriotic War, 2nd degree. In July of 1944, Ramon arrives back home in Texas, and he makes his way back to Washington, D.C., where he's presented the Russian medal. The Stars and Stripes, the famous publication during World War II, actually published an article, and his photo appeared in the Stars and Stripes when he got back to San Antonio with his Russian medal. So Ramon was in uniform from January of 1941 to November of 1944 during World War II. So he's now a civilian. He gets married with Consuelo Sanchez, Connie, and together they start to raise their families. Now, Connie, who was also from the Sonora area in Sonora, Texas, also was a U.S. Navy wave during World War II. And their children were the children of two World War II veterans, Ramon and Connie. Now, Ramon suffered from PTSD his entire life. One of the things that they were telling him, the doctors were telling him, was to keep himself busy at all times. Try not to think too much about the war and just to keep his mind busy. And that's exactly what Ramon did. He was very active in church and in the communities, where he actually was starting baseball leagues, boxing leagues, just to keep himself busy. Several times, Ramon was honored by civic leaders in Wichita Falls, Texas, where he was living with his family, where he was raising his family. Now, much of his family, his parents and a lot of his siblings moved to San Jose, California. And from time to time, Ramon would come to San Jose, California, where I live now. And he would always either stay for a while. He actually lived and worked out here in the Bay Area for a while, working at Stanford, at the VA hospital near in Stanford. And, Ramon would go back and forth either to Wichita Falls and San Jose. And the reason why he came to San Jose originally, because his father, Santana, was ill and eventually had passed away. In 1991, the congressman from the Wichita Falls area, Bill Sarpelis, actually honored Ramon when he entered into the extension of remarks at the congressional floor, honoring Ramon. In 1985, in Del Rio, Texas, they were honoring Ramon at one of the veterans groups. They were honoring Ramon and Medal of Honor recipient Roy Benavides, who had received his Medal of Honor from Vietnam during the Vietnam War conflict. And we'll hear more about this story in the next episode when we talk a little bit about Roy Benavides. In 2021, the Mexican American Veterans Association of Wichita Falls, Texas, held their annual banquet, and during the banquet, they named Sgt Ramon Gutierrez as their Veteran of the Year, and Ramon's daughter, Roberta Gutierrez, accepted the award. So Texas State Rep Wes Virdell, who represents Sonora, Texas, where Ramon originally enlisted in the Army, Representative Virdell officially nominated Ramon for the Texas Medal of Honor. So Ramon passed away on March 1st, 1993 in Wichita Falls, Texas. He was laid to rest with full military honors there near Wichita Falls, Texas. Everyone in the Gutierrez family was very proud of Ramon's World War II service and service to his country. Many of his grandchildren used to, when they had book reports due on World War II, they would bring in Ramon's medals and talk about their grandfather, his service to country. So everyone in the Gutierrez family, we're all very proud of Ramon's service. We want to thank you for joining us on this podcast as we discuss Ramon Garza Gutierrez, who served in the U.S. Army during World War II. Thank you for joining us. Next on Patriots from the Barrio, with our guest, Yvette Benavides Garcia, as we discuss her father, Medal of Honor recipient, Master Sergeant Roy Benavides.